Gollum did not spend his entire life deep inside caves, stroking his precious and hunting blind fish. About 500 years earlier, Gollum was known by a very different name, Smeagol. Long before he became Gollum, in the 2,400 seconds of the Third Age, Smeagol lived in the upper vales of the River Anduin, near the Gladden Fields, and belonged to the Stoor people, a branch of the Hobbit race. The Stoors, with their larger hands and feet, stood apart from the other Hobbit branches because of their natural affinity for water, their skill at fishing, and their settled lifestyle along the riverbanks. Unlike the Shire Hobbits, this community had a more primitive yet internally sophisticated social structure, and in the past, they had migrated eastward from Eriador into the Anduin valleys. Smeagol was born into a prosperous and respected family led by his stern and wise grandmother, who ruled over the community. The family structure points us to an important truth. Smeagol was not an orphan. He had social ties, roots, and a home he belonged to. And yet, he was always like a stranger. Even in those early days, he often spent time alone, loved solitude, and in a sense isolated himself. Tolkien describes Smeagol as inquisitive and curious-minded, but his curiosity was not directed toward the beauty of flowers, or the birds in the sky, or the planets above. He always liked to look downward. He was not interested in how flowers grew, but in their roots, not in the colorful beauty above the soil, but in the dark hollows beneath it, the wet mud, the worms, the tree roots. In Tolkien's words, he peered under roots and began to burrow into holes. Smeagol had a morbid urge to dig into the beginnings of things. Perhaps these were the first stirrings of dark shadow within his soul. Even before he encountered the ring, his inner world already had a tendency to drift beyond social norms. Hobbits enjoy gossip, but usually it is harmless social chatter like who married whom, or who stepped into whose field. With Smeagol, it was far from innocent. He was a thief of knowledge. Even before he found the ring, he did not wait to become invisible to learn people's secrets. He hid in the shadows and listened at doorways. Learning the things people kept hidden, the things they were ashamed of, made him feel powerful. This is the dark reflection of the word Smeagol, the root of his name, meaning to examine or to investigate. The Old English root of his name, Smeagol, is in fact a summary of his character. He was not interested in what lay on the surface, but in the darkness hidden underneath. In the year 2463 of the Third Age, the events on Smeagol's birthday were not just the tragedy of a single hobbit, but the beginning of a chain reaction that would shape the fate of all Middle-earth. While Smeagol was fishing in the Gladden Fields with his cousin and close friend Déagol found a shining golden ring at the bottom of the river. The small ring was the One Ring, forged by Sauron, hidden in the riverbed for 2,500 years after Isildur's death, and longing to return to its master. It was an object powerful enough to alter the destiny of Middle-earth. The corrupting power of the ring revealed itself the very moment it was discovered. The instant Smeagol saw it, he was filled with a deep possessive desire and demanded it as a birthday present. When Déagol refused, Smeagol fell under the control of the dark urges within him and strangled his cousin to death. The murder became the first absolute victory of the One Ring over its new bearer. A sacred family bond was destroyed in a moment of greed. After hiding the body, Smeagol returned to his community and began using the ring's invisibility to behave like a spy and a thief among his own people. In the years that followed the murder, Smeagol's character sank rapidly into darkness. Through the power of the ring, he learned hidden secrets, played cruel tricks on his neighbors, and stirred unrest. The old curious hobbit was gone. In his place stood a dark spy. Because of the disturbing swallowing sounds he made in his throat, he was contemptuously given the nickname Gollum. This deepened his social isolation. He became an unwanted figure within the community, and eventually his own grandmother personally drove him out of the family burrow and away from the riverbank. This period of exile was when Smeagol's hatred of nature and light took root. He began calling the sun the yellow face and the moon the white face, fleeing from both. Light was a threat that exposed the murder he had committed and the decay within him. Moving northward, Gollum reached the foothills of the Misty Mountains and took refuge in the dark tunnels beneath them. Thus began the story of a thief who wanted to hide his precious from the whole world, only to become imprisoned in the bottomless dungeon of his own mind. Around the year 2470 of the Third Age, Smeagol fled from the burning brightness of the sun and the judging eyes of his people and took shelter in the heart of the Misty Mountains. This was not a simple story of hiding. It was the beginning of 500 years of complete sensory deprivation and mental imprisonment. Deep within the mountains, Gollum made a home for himself on a small, damp island in the middle of an underground lake. His entire daily routine in that environment was shaped by nothing but the instinct to survive. Gollum's basic food was the blind, colorless fish that lived in the depths of those pitch-black waters. But his prey was not always innocent. From time to time, he ambushed orcs who strayed down from Goblin Town or lost their way in the dark tunnels, using the invisibility granted by the ring. Consuming his prey raw gradually caused an irreversible change in both his digestive system and his sense of taste. He became a predator who felt physical disgust toward cooked food, bread, and any kind of plant-based nourishment, living only on raw flesh and blood. His body could now be sustained only by death and decay. Gollum had not completely lost the genetic inheritance of the Stoor people, who had once lived by the river. Drawing on this ancient skill of understanding water, he built a small, makeshift boat out of bones and scraps of skin gathered from corpses. With the boat, he drifted silently across the still waters of the underground lake, emerging suddenly from the darkness to seize his prey like a shadow. At first, he wore the ring constantly on his finger, but over time, because of its weight and the exhaustion it radiated, he began hiding it in a crack in a rock on his island. Even so, every day he would stroke it, call it "my precious," and talk to it. Centuries of total darkness twisted Gollum's body far beyond the shape of a hobbit and into something grotesque. His eyes became vast, lamp-like organs, built to catch even the faintest trace of light in the blackness. Deprived entirely of sunlight, his skin turned pale, translucent, and slick. His hands and feet lengthened for climbing. His fingers grew clammy and strong. In time, Gollum stopped walking upright and began moving on all fours with the agility of a spider or a monkey. He was no longer the young hobbit fishing by the riverside. He had become the malignant creature known as Gollum, feeding on the blind fish of cave lakes and eating raw flesh. Gollum's condition is not a transformation that can be explained by magic alone. In the language of modern medicine, he is a terminal stage addict. The One Ring has completely seized control of the reward mechanism in his mind. For 500 years, Gollum had no other motivation left. No friend, no family, not even a good hobbit meal, only the ring. The neurobiological enslavement that unfolded over that time split his identity in two. On one side was the weak Smeagol, who still carried childhood memories and fragments of humanity. On the other was the savage Gollum, driven purely by survival instinct and the will of the ring. St. Augustine's principle, evil is the absence of good, takes on flesh in Gollum's character. Is Gollum an evil being, or is he a hollow shell, stripped entirely of the good within him? Gollum's existence in the cave is not really a state of being, but a state of non-being. He is a shadow deprived of his own will, reduced to nothing more than an extension of the ring. His tragedy is not that he chose to be evil, but that he no longer possesses the will to choose the good. From a neurobiological perspective, addiction functions through the manipulation of the brain's reward system, particularly the neurotransmitter dopamine. The One Ring acts as an external stimulus that causes an intense release of dopamine in Gollum's brain. Normally, a hobbit's brain would release a reasonable amount of dopamine after a good meal or a joke shared with a friend. But the ring hijacks that system. It reprograms the brain's motivational pathways and places itself above basic survival needs such as food, sleep, and social bonds. Gollum believes he needs the ring in order to survive. In truth, while the ring keeps him alive, it is slowly hollowing him out from within. Addiction directly affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and rational thought. In Gollum's case, the ring's influence has paralyzed the functions of the prefrontal cortex, causing him to lose his moral judgment and descend into impulsive aggression. The inner conflict between the Smeagol and Gollum personalities reflects the cognitive dissonance typical of addiction, the war between the desire to be free of the ring and the urge to possess it. He cannot make decisions. He can only act on impulse. There are striking parallels between the effects of the One Ring and the physical and psychological effects of modern synthetic stimulants. Gollum's 500 years with the ring led to irreversible brain damage and turned him into a living dead creature whose entire existence was indexed to the ring. His physical deformation was not caused only by living in darkness, but also by tooth loss and bone decay, much like the rotting teeth, often seen as a consequence of modern synthetic stimulants. We can compare Gollum's symptoms with the clinical signs of substance addiction as follows: hair loss, broken teeth, a weak skeletal frame, fallen hair, extreme aging, paranoia, delusions, obsession, strange vocal sounds, and distortion of the structure of the mouth. Gollum's imprisonment beneath the mountains coincided with a critical phase in the history of Middle-earth. This period of the Third Age was a time when the watchful peace was coming to an end, and Sauron's power was quietly reorganizing itself. In the very year Gollum found the ring, 2463, Sauron had returned to Dol Guldur under the identity of the Necromancer, and the shadow was once again falling over Mirkwood. The line of the kings of Gondor had died out, and the stewards had taken over the rule. In 2475, Osgiliath was laid waste, and the first Uruk assaults from Mordor had begun. The orcs of the Misty Mountains, under Sauron's command, had begun multiplying again and taking control of strategic passes. Gollum's dwelling lay right in the middle of this growing orc activity. Yet thanks to the ring, he managed to remain detached from the chaos. The last bond, tying Gollum to his humanity, was his love of riddles. This was a remnant of the old culture of his river folk. In 2941, Bilbo Baggins, traveling through the mountains with Thorin and his company, was lost in the caves and searching for a way out. While feeling his way through the pitch-black tunnels, Bilbo accidentally stumbled over a metallic object on the ground. When he reached down and picked it up, he realized it was a cold, smooth golden ring. He had no idea what it was, who it belonged to, or what kind of power it contained. He simply assumed it was an ordinary trinket and slipped it into his pocket. As he continued on, he came face to face with Gollum. Gollum saw Bilbo as prey that had come right to his feet, but the sword, sting in Bilbo's hand, allowed him to protect himself. So the two made an agreement based on their own interests. Gollum offered Bilbo a riddle game. According to the rules, if Bilbo won, Gollum would show him the way out. If Gollum won, he would eat Bilbo. In fact, he had never eaten a hobbit before and was curious about the taste. He kept asking him things like, "What do hobbits taste like, my precious? Are they juicy and succulent?" The riddle contest came to a halt when Bilbo, involuntarily referring to the ring in his pocket, asked, "What have I got in my pocket?" Although Gollum argued that this was not a real riddle, by accepting 3 guesses he effectively acknowledged the legitimacy of the game. When he failed to guess correctly, and then realized the ring was no longer in its place, he exploded in rage. The harsh, rasping sorrow of Gollum, who had lost the riddle game and realized that he had lost his precious, gave way to wild fury. As Bilbo fled from this invisible danger coming toward him in the dark, he thrust his hand into his pocket in terror and slipped the cold ring onto his finger. In an instant, he realized he had passed Gollum like a shadow, and that the creature could no longer see him. While Gollum collapsed at the cave exit and wept, Bilbo stood right behind him with sword in hand. With a single blow, he could have ended the life of this revolting creature. But in that very moment, the ancient wisdom of Gandalf echoed in Bilbo's mind. True courage is about knowing not when to take a life. Bilbo saw that the creature before him was not just a killer, but also a wretched being writhing in endless grief and loneliness, one who had forgotten the sunlight. He lowered his sword. The hatred within him gave way to a deep feeling of pity. He leapt over Gollum and ran into the darkness. The act of mercy Bilbo showed in that moment was in fact the first knot in the thin thread that would keep Middle-earth from being swallowed by darkness. After losing the ring, Gollum emerged from the mountains, driven by his unbearable hunger for it. He first tracked Bilbo as far as Esgaroth and Dale, but in the end, he was drawn into Mordor by Sauron's rising power. Between 3009 and 3017, he was captured near the borders of Mordor and thrown into the dungeons of Barad-dûr. Gollum was brought before Sauron, the Dark Lord himself. One of the few beings ever to see Sauron's physical form, Gollum noticed that the Lord had only 4 fingers on his hand. In the dungeons of Barad-dûr, Gollum was subjected to unimaginable tortures. This process left new and irreparable damage in a mind that had already been shattered. Under torture, Gollum's mind could not withstand Sauron's absolute will, and he cried out 2 words, Shire and Baggins. That confession was enough for Sauron to find the trail of the lost ring. Rather than killing Gollum, Sauron chose to use his obsession with the ring. He knew Gollum would return to it, so he released him while sending watchers after him. This strategic move turned Gollum into the most dangerous and pitiful hound in all of Middle-earth. With Gollum released from the gates of Mordor as bait, a dark period began spreading like a whisper through the hidden corners of Middle-earth. After emerging from the dungeons of Barad-dûr, Gollum encountered an ancient horror living deep within the pass of Cirith Ungol. That horror was the giant spider Shelob. Gollum saw this dark being almost as a goddess and worshipped her. To Shelob, Gollum was not worth eating because of his foul taste, but he could serve as a loyal servant. Called her Sneak by the orcs, Gollum made a dark promise to bring Shelob fresher and more delicious prey. Leaving Shelob behind under the weight of the bloody oath, Gollum turned north toward the edges of Mirkwood, following his old memories and undying hatred. But this return was not the journey of a soul-seeking peace. It was the hunt of a sharpened beast, driven to feed himself and fulfill the promise he had made to Shelob. The relentless hunting skills Gollum had learned from Shelob made him a perfect predator. For the woodland communities living in the misty depths of Mirkwood, this period marked the beginning of an age when the nights were no longer merely dark, but deeply sinister. In the village squares, elders gathering around the fire began to tell hair-raising stories. The villagers spoke of a thin, wet ghost that could undo door latches with skill, slip down chimneys like smoke, and silence even dogs in terror. The most horrifying stories were told in whispers, through tears. The empty cradles. Mothers, at the first light of dawn, found swaddles empty and glimpsed a shadow departing through a window, left wide open. This shadow was no longer just a savage creature seeking fresh blood and raw flesh. It had become a ghoul that preyed on innocence, staining children's sleep with blood in the night. All it left behind were sticky, filthy traces on the ground, and an unending atmosphere of mourning. Sauron was not the only one who knew of the ring and of Gollum, and who wanted to find him. Gandalf too wanted to find the ring before Sauron could seize it, for the salvation of Middle-earth. Through Bilbo, Gandalf had learned of both the ring and Gollum, and so he had begun hunting Gollum. When Gandalf and Aragorn passed through the villages of Mirkwood, during their years-long relentless pursuit, what they encountered looked less like an intelligence report and more like a book of mourning. The dreadful details that fell from the trembling voices of the woodmen whispered a bitter truth to Gandalf. The last human fragment of the Hobbit, who had once played jokes by the riverside, had also perished in Mordor's torture chambers, and in the unending hunger of the ring, Smeagol was dead. Only Gollum remained the creature who drowned stories in darkness and stole life from cradles at night. While Sauron's strategic release had turned Gollum into the most dangerous and pitiful hound in Middle-earth, he was now no longer merely a ring-bearer, but the darkest and bloodiest legend of Mirkwood. When the terror he spread in Mirkwood drew the attention of elves and master trackers, Gollum realized that he, once the hunter, had become the hunted. To escape the dense forest and the keen eyes of the elves, he turned south again, toward the dead marshes, the very threshold of Mordor. It was a cursed land, filled with the ghosts of those who had died in ancient wars and with poisonous vapors, a place the living feared even to step into. For Gollum, these marshes were a refuge. He hid among the cold faces of the dead beneath stagnant pools and crawled through the mud like a serpent, trying to lose his trail. But he was not only fleeing from the elves here. One side of him was still drawn toward the dark will of Sauron, master of the ring, while another sought safety beneath the shadow of his ally Shelob, guardian of Mordor's gate. But this time, the shadow pursuing him was a ranger who knew every trick of the marshes. Aragorn followed for days the faint fingerprints Gollum left in the mud and the disgusting rings he left on the water's surface at night. Gollum was hiding in the deepest, foulest pit of the marsh, sunk into a heap of slime. When Aragorn's iron hands closed around his throat, Aragorn would later describe this as the hardest hunt of my life. Even in the sticky darkness of the marsh, Gollum struggled to escape, clawed, bit, whispered venomous words, and gave off an unbearable stench. But there was no escape now. This wretched creature who carried the greatest secret in Middle-earth was now a prisoner, to be brought before Gandalf. After capturing Gollum, Aragorn put a halter around his neck and dragged him 900 miles northward through the Anduin valleys, back again to the Elven realm in Mirkwood. When Gollum was brought before Gandalf, he was not just a frightened creature, but also a professional liar. The ring had warped Gollum's mind so deeply that he believed his own invented lie, that he had received the ring as a birthday present. Gandalf realized He would never get the truth out of Gollum with kind words or persuasion. To break his resistance, he interrogated him using fear of fire. As a result of that questioning, Gandalf learned the history of the ring, how it had passed from Isildur to Smeagol, and that Sauron was now aware of the Shire. While under the watch of the elves, Gollum managed to escape during an orc attack in 3018 and hid himself in the depths of Moria. There, he would pick up the trail of the Fellowship of the Ring and begin following them. The Fellowship of the Ring had set out to decide the fate of Middle-earth. Their purpose was to carry Sauron's One Ring into the heart of Mordor, where his power was gathering once more, and destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom, the only place where it had been forged. Gollum did not know the purpose of this sacred and dangerous mission. He only felt that his precious had returned and burned with the desire to touch it again. Gollum, trapped in the mines of Moria because he could not open the West Gate, remained stuck there. When the Fellowship entered Moria in January 3019, Gollum sensed the pull of the ring and began following them, from Moria to Lothlorien, and from there, by boat, down the Anduin to Amon Hen. He trailed the Fellowship like an invisible shadow. When Frodo and Sam split from the group, Gollum followed them as well, but was captured in the rocks of Emyn Muil. Gollum's most distinctive trait is that he carries two conflicting personalities within his mind. In popular culture, this is often described as schizophrenia, but clinically the evidence suggests something closer to dissociative identity disorder. A clarification is needed here. Gollum is not schizophrenic, because in the reality of Middle-earth, the Eye and the whispers of the ring are not hallucinations, but concrete realities. In this divided state, Smeagol represents the last human fragments from his hobbit past and his feelings of attachment, while Gollum symbolizes the dark side that has surrendered to the malevolent will of the ring and become savage in order to survive. From the perspective of Carl Jung, one of psychology's giants, Gollum is the purest outward expression of the shadow archetype. According to Jung, every human being has a repressed dark side within them that does not conform to social rules. By using the ring, Smeagol did not merely release this darkness, he turned it into a way of life. By wearing the ring and taking refuge in its power, Smeagol projected the suppressed darkness within himself into an external personality called Gollum. The shadow both helps Smeagol protect the ring and constantly humiliates and terrifies him, keeping him under spiritual torment. While the Smeagol personality represents the last human fragments from his hobbit past friendship, loyalty, attachment, the Gollum personality symbolizes the dark side that has surrendered to the ring's evil will, committing murder and even cannibalism in order to survive. Gollum is, in fact, what Frodo could become. He is Frodo's shadow in the mirror. The astonishing mercy Frodo shows, Gollum is, in truth, a form of compassion for the darkness within himself. When Frodo says, "I pity him," what he is really crying out is this: "If I cannot bear this burden, I will become that as well." Gollum's meeting with Frodo brings the war between these two personalities to its peak. The fact that Frodo addresses him by his real name Smeagol opens a door that has been sealed for 500 years. It is a kind of naming magic. To call someone by their name is to remind them of the honor and identity they have lost. And at exactly this point, the conflict between these two personalities reaches its peak, especially in the Dead Marshes sequence of the Two Towers. When Frodo and Sam capture Gollum in the harsh cliffs of Emyn Muil, Gollum offers to serve them in order to save his own life. Rather than binding him hand and foot, Frodo spares him and accepts him as their guide, someone who knows the roads and the land better than anyone. As they make their way toward Mount Doom, but first demands an oath not to betray them, Gollum swears on the precious. Knowing the weight of the oath, Frodo warns him, "The ring is your master, Smeagol. It gave you pain when you found it, and greater pain when you lost it. If you swear by it, know that it will hold you, but it will not hold you for your good. It will use you for its own evil purposes. It may even drive you to the edge of a precipice one day." With these words, Frodo binds Gollum's will to the ring. From that point on, the Smeagol personality behaves like a child, trying to remain faithful to this sacred promise, while the Gollum personality watches for every chance to invalidate it through envy and hatred. This is not just a matter of guiding a journey. It is a soul's final bargain with its own destruction. Gollum successfully led the hobbits through the Dead Marshes, using paths unknown even to Sauron's armies, and brought them all the way to the Black Gate. But when he saw that the gate was impassable, he directed them toward the stairs of Cirith Ungol, which he described as a secret and unguarded way. During this time, the Smeagol personality Slinker seemed almost to blossom under Frodo's kindness, while the Gollum-side Stinker continued quietly planning betrayal. This fragile balance was irreversibly broken when their journey turned into the green woods of Ithilien, and they entered one of Gondor's hidden lines of defense. While Faramir and his men were ambushing a Haradrim force, they captured the hobbits. But Gollum escaped into the darkness with his unique agility, yet hunger overpowered reason. Gollum began fishing in the Forbidden Pool, directly beneath the Rangers' hidden refuge. That pool was sacred ground. The penalty for strangers who entered without permission was death without question. When Faramir noticed this strange shadow in the water, he ordered his archers to take aim. With only seconds left before Gollum's death, Frodo was confronted with an impossible dilemma. To Frodo, Gollum was no longer merely a creature he pitied. He was also the only guide who knew the way into the heart of Mordor. If Gollum died, the quest would fail, and Middle-earth would fall into darkness. To save both Gollum's life and the mission itself, Frodo begged Faramir. The only solution was to call Gollum out of the pool himself. When Gollum heard the soft, friendly tone in Frodo's voice, he believed that his master was rescuing him from danger, and he came to him in complete trust. But in that instant, the hidden Rangers leapt on him and threw a sack over his head. At that moment, Smeagol had truly begun to heal and to feel an unshakable trust in Frodo. But being tricked by Frodo and handed over to those rough hands caused a devastating shock in Gollum's mind. Frodo's intention had been to save his life, but in Gollum's perception, it meant only one thing. The Master is a trickster and a liar, just like all the others. In clinical terms, this resembles the severe relapse of a patient who has been in rehabilitation for a long time and is suddenly subjected to a traumatic intervention by the very person he trusted most. The Castle of Loyalty. Smeagol had spent weeks painstakingly building collapsed from within that night in the damp cellar of Henneth Anun. For the Gollum personality, which seized the reins once again, Frodo was no longer a friend, but a traitor who had stabbed him in the back. And the price of the betrayal would be to lead them safely into Shelob's lair. After leaving Faramir behind, Gollum led the hobbits to Mordor's most sinister entrance, the stairs of Cirith Ungol, the Pass of the Spider. These were steep stone steps rising almost vertically into the sky, seeming endless. Gollum climbed ahead like a spider, while Frodo and Sam, exhausted to the point of collapse, followed behind him. During this journey, Gollum's behavior had changed. The cheerful murmurs of Smeagol were gone. There were only dark bargains made with the precious and sly glances, waiting for every moment of weakness in the hobbits. Gollum was leading them to ancient Shelob, who guarded the borders of Mordor. And it is right here, at the resting place atop those steep stairs, that we arrive at the most piercing question of the entire video. Was there ever any hope for Gollum? Tolkien answers this question with a very specific and heartbreaking scene. As Frodo and Sam lie asleep in deep exhaustion at the edge of the cliff, Gollum silently creeps toward them. In that moment, the enormous burden of the ring gnawing at his soul for 500 years seems to lighten for a single second. As Gollum looks at the sleeping Frodo's face, he sees not just a hobbit, but his own innocence from centuries ago. The Smeagol, who used to joke by the riverside, fish, and feel the warmth of the sun. Frodo's peaceful sleep is a reflection of the pure childhood Smeagol lost in the dark labyrinths. Tolkien describes the moment with haunting sorrow. The gleam faded from his eyes, and they went dim and gray, old and tired. For a moment it looked as if an old, weary hobbit, shrunken by the years that had carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin, and the fields and streams of youth, old and starved and pitiable, sat crouched at their feet. In that second, Gollum slowly reaches out and touches the sleeping Frodo's knee. This is not an attack, nor an act of theft. It is a caress one, containing 5 centuries of loneliness, dark caves smelling of raw flesh, and an unending burden of guilt. Hidden in the touch is Smeagol's impossible hope to heal, to be forgiven, and to have a home again. At that very second, the fate of Middle-earth could have changed. If Samwise Gamgee had not awakened and shouted at him, pawing at Master, Gollum might at that moment have truly repented. Sam's mistake was not evil, but a kind of mental myopia born of loyalty. Yet his harshness snuffed out the last remaining light of hope inside Gollum. In that moment, Gollum chose to become Gollum forever, and pushed the hobbits one last time toward the tunnel entrance to Shelob's webs. According to Tolkien, if Sam had acted gently in that moment, Gollum might still have fallen to the temptation of the ring, but in the final scene, When taking the ring from Frodo, he might have done so not to harm him, but to save both his master and the ring by casting them both into the fire. That would have been a holy suicide. Smeagol had developed a kind of Stockholm syndrome toward Frodo. He wanted to earn forgiveness by serving him, but Sam's suspicions seemed to confirm Gollum's belief that all people are tricksters. As a result, the faint light within Smeagol was extinguished, and Gollum fully overwhelmed Smeagol. When Gollum led the hobbits into the pitch-black darkness of the tunnel, he was in fact leading them into an open-air tomb. He himself slipped away into the dark like a shadow and awakened Shelob. Gollum's plan was perfect. Shelob would eat the hobbits, throw aside their clothes and belongings, and Gollum would recover his precious from among the pile of bones without a single drop of blood on it. Gollum planned to leave the hobbits to die in Shelob's lair and recover his precious effortlessly, but Sam's unshakable loyalty and the last fragments of will still alive within Frodo ruined the plan. Wounded, hungry, and humiliated, he followed them like a shadow all the way up the steep slopes of Mount Doom. By then, there was no trace of Smeagol left, nor any possibility of mercy. There was only pure obsession and a burning hunger. The 25th of March 3019 of the Third Age. The journey came to its end in the chambers of Sammath Naur, the very place where it had all begun. Frodo had overcome every obstacle, passed beyond the Nine Riders and a vast army, and come all the way to the edge of the abyss. Only the smallest movement remained between him and his goal. All he had to do was let the ring go. But the One Ring, in the terrible heat of the place where it had been forged, reached the height of its power. At the final threshold, Frodo yielded to the ring's cunning will and claimed it for his own. "The ring is mine," he cried, placing it on his finger and declaring his existence to the entire world. In that second, all hope for Middle-earth was exhausted, and the ring prepared to return to its true master, Sauron. But at the exact moment, an unexpected hand reached out from the darkness. Gollum, driven by his 500-year obsession, hurled himself at Frodo. This was not merely a struggle, it was the death dance of two addicts fighting for the same false god. When Gollum bit off Frodo's finger and took back the ring, he experienced the happiest and last moment of his life. Gollum had not wanted to save the world, he only wanted his precious. Gollum was a victim of the ring, yet his selfish desire became the one force that saved the world where the power of goodness alone was not enough. Here, Tolkien whispers something profound to us. Evil is not creative by nature, but sometimes, while digging its own grave, it unknowingly ends up serving the good. As Gollum fell into the lava with the ring, he was both ending his own suffering and lifting the shadow from Middle-earth. This was not suicide, it was the justice of fate. When Smeagol died, no grave remained behind him, no monument. He returned to the fire from which he had come, as though he had never existed at all. But when Frodo returned to the Shire, he knew this much. If the wretched, pitiful creature had not existed, neither the Shire nor the hobbits would have survived. Gollum's story teaches us this. Even within the darkest addictions, a fragment of innocence may still remain. And sometimes the world is saved not by the swords of heroes, but by the suffering and mistakes of victims. Farewell, Smeagol, and farewell, Gollum. At last, you are free.